A strong voice has stepped in. Not noise. Not hype. A clear warning. Hakeem Baba-Ahmed is not speaking to impress anyone. He is speaking to stop a mistake before it happens. His message is simple. Step aside. He is talking directly to Atiku Abubakar, a man who has run again and again, chasing one final win. But this time, the message is different. This path will not work. Not because Atiku is weak. Not because he lacks structure. But because Nigeria has changed. The anger is deeper. The trust is broken. The people are watching closer than ever. This is not the same country it was a few years ago. The patience is thinner. The expectations are higher. And the tolerance for recycled ideas is almost gone. For many voters, this is no longer about party loyalty. It is about credibility. It is about who can be trusted to do something different. That is the shift that cannot be ignored. And that is exactly where Baba-Ahmed is placing his focus. Not on history, but on momentum. Not on experience alone, but on public perception. Because right now, perception is power. And in that space, Atiku is facing a new kind of resistance. Not loud, but steady. Not chaotic, but focused. A growing belief that the same approach will lead to the same result. That belief is dangerous in politics. Once it spreads, it becomes difficult to control. And then comes the bold idea. Not Atiku. Not the old pattern. But a new ticket. Peter Obi and Rabiu Kwankwaso. A combination that feels unexpected, but serious enough to change the direction of the race. This is not just a random suggestion. It is a calculated move. A signal that the opposition needs to reset, not recycle. Obi brings a strong base that is built on discipline and message control. He connects with voters who are tired of traditional politics. His appeal is quiet but firm. Kwankwaso brings structure, regional strength, and political experience that cannot be ignored. His network is solid, and his influence runs deep in key areas. Put them together, and the balance begins to shift. That is the thinking behind the proposal. But the warning does not stop there. Baba-Ahmed is not just offering an option. He is pointing at a risk. If Atiku pushes forward and secures the African Democratic Congress ticket, the consequences could be immediate. Other strong figures may not stay. Tensions could rise quickly. And what looks like a united front today could break apart before the campaign even settles. That is not a small risk. That is a possible collapse. Because the opposition is already under pressure to prove it can work together. Any sign of division will weaken its position instantly. And voters are paying attention. They are not just looking at promises anymore. They are watching behavior. They are measuring decisions. They are asking one question: can these leaders actually work as one? If the answer becomes no, the damage will be hard to reverse. That is why this message matters. It is not emotional. It is strategic. It is about timing. It is about control. It is about understanding that sometimes, stepping back is not weakness. It is positioning. And right now, the clock is moving. The conversation has shifted, and it is no longer quiet. What started as a suggestion is now turning into a serious political debate. Across party lines and within the opposition, the focus is changing from personalities to structure. From ambition to strategy. From who wants power to who can actually win and govern. This is where the idea of a joint ticket begins to carry weight. Peter Obi is seen by many as a figure who connects with a new class of voters. People who are less tied to old party systems and more focused on accountability, economic direction, and clear messaging. His influence has grown beyond traditional regions, driven by a support base that is active, vocal, and difficult to ignore. At the same time, Rabiu Kwankwaso brings a different kind of strength. His political structure is organized and deeply rooted. His support is not just online or symbolic. It is physical, consistent, and tied to long-standing networks that can mobilize quickly. When analysts look at both figures side by side, the conversation becomes less about popularity and more about balance. Balance of regions. Balance of political styles. Balance of voter blocks. That balance is what makes the proposal serious. It is not built on emotion. It is built on numbers and reach. In recent cycles, one of the biggest challenges for opposition parties has been fragmentation. Too many candidates dividing attention, dividing votes, and weakening the overall impact. That pattern has been costly. Now, there is growing pressure to avoid repeating it. This is where the role of Atiku Abubakar becomes central again. Not as a candidate this time, but as a figure who can influence alignment. Political observers note that Atiku still holds significant weight within coalition talks. His experience, network, and history in national elections give him access to key decision-makers. That influence can either stabilize the opposition or deepen internal competition. If he steps back and supports a unified ticket, it sends a clear signal of coordination. It shows that personal ambition is being set aside for a larger objective. But if he moves forward to secure the ticket under the African Democratic Congress, the situation becomes more complex. Other aspirants may see it as a closed door. Negotiations could stall. And what could have been a coalition may turn into parallel campaigns once again. That is the risk being discussed in political circles. Beyond individuals, the broader issue is credibility. Voters are no longer responding the same way to campaign promises. There is a growing demand for evidence of cooperation before elections, not just after. People want to see leaders align early, make compromises, and show discipline in how they approach power. That expectation is shaping decisions behind the scenes. It is also influencing how current leadership is being assessed. Bola Tinubu remains a central figure in the national conversation, not just as the incumbent but as a benchmark for performance. Economic pressure, security concerns, and social challenges continue to dominate public discussion. These issues are not abstract. They affect daily life, and they are shaping voter expectations ahead of 2027. That is why any opposition strategy must go beyond slogans. It must present a structure that looks stable and ready to govern. The Kwankwaso idea is being viewed through that lens. Not as a perfect solution, but as a possible step toward consolidation. It is also forcing conversations within parties that were previously avoided. Questions about zoning. Questions about leadership rotation. Questions about generational change. These are sensitive topics, but they are now part of open discussion. And with that openness comes pressure. Pressure on party leaders to make early decisions. Pressure on aspirants to clarify their intentions. Pressure on alliances to move from informal talks to formal agreements. Time is becoming a factor. The closer the political calendar moves toward primaries, the narrower the window for unity becomes. Delays could lead to rushed decisions. Rushed decisions often lead to weak outcomes. That is why voices like Hakeem Baba-Ahmed are gaining attention at this stage. They are not just commenting on events. They are attempting to shape them before positions become fixed. Whether that influence will translate into action remains uncertain. But what is clear is that the conversation has moved beyond speculation. It is now about choices that will define the structure of the next election. And those choices are being watched closely, not just by political insiders, but by a public that is increasingly aware of how these decisions affect outcomes. The next phase will depend on how quickly decisions are made and how clearly they are communicated. Delays create uncertainty, and uncertainty weakens momentum. Within the opposition, there is now a clear understanding that mixed signals could cost more than open disagreement. Leaders are being pushed to state their positions early, define their alliances, and reduce speculation. For Peter Obi, the expectation from supporters is consistency. Any sign of compromise without clear direction could raise concerns among a base that values discipline and focus. For Rabiu Kwankwaso, the focus remains on maintaining structure while staying open to negotiation. His position requires balance between strength and flexibility. And for Atiku Abubakar, the moment is becoming more defined. The space to delay a decision is shrinking. Political stakeholders are watching closely to see whether he signals a shift or maintains his current path. That decision will likely influence how quickly other actors move. Meanwhile, public attention is increasing. Discussions are no longer limited to party members or analysts. Voters are engaging more directly, asking questions, comparing options, and forming early opinions. This level of awareness is changing how strategies are built. It is no longer enough to prepare for campaigns. Leaders are now expected to show readiness long before campaigns begin. The final stage is approaching, and the margin for error is closing fast. What once looked like a flexible political space is becoming tighter, more defined, and less forgiving. At this point, every move carries weight. Every delay sends a message. Every decision shapes the structure of what comes next. For Atiku Abubakar, the focus is no longer just on participation. It is on impact. Political observers are now framing his position in two clear paths. The first is familiar. Enter the race, secure a ticket, build another campaign, and test his strength once again at the national level. The second is different. Step back from direct competition and shift into a coordinating role that influences outcomes without appearing on the ballot. This second path is gaining more attention for one reason. Control. Not control in the traditional sense of authority, but control over alignment. Control over how different interests come together. Control over whether the opposition moves as one or breaks into parts. That role is often underestimated in public discussions, but within political systems, it carries deep influence. If managed effectively, it can determine candidate selection, guide coalition agreements, and reduce internal conflict before it becomes public. This is the space where Atiku's experience becomes relevant in a different way. Years of engagement at the national level have given him relationships that cut across regions and parties. Those connections can either be used to compete or to coordinate. At this stage, coordination is what many analysts are emphasizing. Because the cost of fragmentation is already known. Previous election cycles have shown that divided opposition structures struggle to convert public dissatisfaction into electoral success. Vote split. Messaging becomes inconsistent. Momentum fades. Avoiding that pattern is now a central objective. This is where the proposed alignment around Peter Obi and Rabiu Kwankwaso continues to generate discussion. The idea is not being presented as a guaranteed solution, but as a framework that could reduce duplication and concentrate support. Obi's profile remains tied to a message of reform, fiscal discipline, and institutional accountability. His appeal extends to younger voters and professionals who are actively engaged in political discourse. Kwankwaso's position remains anchored in established networks, with a base that has shown consistency over time. His political machinery is structured and capable of mobilization beyond online engagement. When these two elements are viewed together, the conversation shifts from individual strength to combined capacity. Capacity to reach different voter segments. Capacity to maintain message discipline. Capacity to build a broader coalition that can compete at scale. However, capacity alone is not enough. Execution becomes the next critical factor. Alignments require negotiation. Negotiation requires compromise. And compromise often introduces tension. That tension must be managed carefully to avoid public fallout. This is where timing becomes critical again. Early agreements create clarity. Late agreements create confusion. And confusion, in a competitive political environment, often benefits the incumbent. Bola Tinubu remains at the center of that environment. As the current leader, his position is shaped by performance metrics that are constantly being evaluated by the public. Economic conditions, security reports, and social stability are all part of that evaluation. These are not abstract indicators. They are daily realities that influence perception and, ultimately, voting behavior. For any opposition structure to be effective, it must present not just criticism, but a credible alternative that appears organized and ready. That requirement is becoming more visible in public discussions. Voters are asking direct questions. Who is leading? Who is supporting? What is the plan? And how is it different from what already exists? These questions are shaping expectations in real time. They are also reducing the space for vague positioning. Clarity is becoming a political asset. In this context, the role of figures like Hakeem Baba-Ahmed remains significant. Their statements are not just commentary. They are interventions aimed at influencing direction before decisions become fixed. By calling for strategic withdrawal and realignment, they are attempting to prevent a repeat of known challenges. Whether that intervention will lead to measurable change depends on how key actors respond. Response, in this case, is not limited to public statements. It includes private negotiations, internal party decisions, and the ability to align interests that do not naturally fit together. This is complex work. But it is necessary. Because the environment is no longer forgiving of disorganization. The electorate is more attentive. Information moves faster. And political outcomes are increasingly tied to preparation rather than last-minute adjustments. As the timeline advances, the space for adjustment will continue to shrink. What remains will be execution. Clear decisions. Defined alliances. Structured campaigns. And a political landscape where every choice made now will carry forward into the final outcome.